I was sitting in my dimly lit study, surrounded by the familiar smell of old books and the faint scent of my wife's perfume. It was a smell that always brought me comfort, a reminder of the happy years we had spent together before she passed away. But today, it was tinged with a hint of sadness, a reminder of all that I had lost. It had been 10 long years since my daughter, Emma, had last set foot in this house. We had had a falling out, a disagreement that had ended in her storming out of the house and never looking back. I had tried to reach out to her, to apologize and make amends, but she had refused to listen. I heard the sound of the front door opening, and my heart skipped a beat as I wondered who it could be. I wasn't expecting any visitors, and I certainly wasn't expecting my daughter to show up out of the blue. And then I saw her, standing in the doorway of my study, looking more beautiful than I remembered. Her long blonde hair cascaded down her back, and her bright blue eyes sparkled in the dim light. But as our eyes met, I saw something in hers that made my heart sink. It was a look of greed, of calculation, of a plan that had been years in the making. I knew that look, I had seen it before, and it always spelled trouble. "Emma, what are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I heard about your inheritance, Dad," she said, her voice cold and calculating. "I heard you got $500,000 from Grandma's estate." I felt a pang of surprise, wondering how she had found out about the inheritance. But before I could respond, she dropped the bombshell. "You're coming with me, Dad," she said, her eyes glinting with greed. "We're going to go get that money, and then we're going to start a new life together." I was taken aback, unsure of what to say or do. A part of me wanted to reach out to her, to try and understand what was driving her. But another part of me was wary, sensing that something was not quite right. As I sat there, frozen in uncertainty, Emma took a step closer to me. Her eyes seemed to bore into my soul, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. "What do you mean, Emma?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I mean that we're going to get that money, and then we're going to leave this place behind," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "We're going to start a new life, just the two of us." I felt a surge of fear, wondering what she had planned. But before I could respond, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving me sitting there in stunned silence. As I sat there, trying to process what had just happened, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was very wrong. And as I looked around the room, I realized that I was in grave danger. But I didn't know just how much danger I was in, not yet. All I knew was that my daughter had come back into my life, and she had a plan. A plan that would change everything. As I sat there, trying to process what had just happened, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was very wrong. Emma's words kept echoing in my mind, "We're going to get that money, and then we're going to leave this place behind." What did she mean by that? Was she planning to take the money and run? And what did she mean by, "start a new life, together"? I thought back to our past, to the arguments we had and the hurtful things we had said to each other. I couldn't see how we could just pick up where we left off and start a new life together. I decided to try and talk to her, to see if I could get some answers. I got up from my chair and walked out of the study, calling out to her. "Emma, wait," I said, but she was already gone. I searched the house, but she was nowhere to be found. I went back to the study and sat down, trying to think of what to do next. As I sat there, I heard a noise coming from outside. It sounded like someone was rummaging through the trash cans. I got up and went to the window, pulling back the curtain to see what was going on. And that's when I saw her, digging through the trash cans in the backyard. I felt a surge of anger and frustration. What was she doing? I quickly opened the back door and rushed out into the yard. "Emma, what are you doing?" I demanded. She turned to me, a guilty look on her face. "Just looking for something," she said, trying to brush me off. But I knew better. She was looking for something specific, something she thought I might have thrown away. I walked over to her and grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the trash cans. "What are you looking for?" I asked, my voice firm. She tried to shake me off, but I held tight. "Let me go," she said, her voice rising. But I didn't let go. I held her arm, my grip tightening. Suddenly, she stopped struggling and looked up at me. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I saw something there that made my blood run cold. It was a look of pure hatred, of anger and resentment. And in that moment, I knew that I was in grave danger. "You'll never stop me," she said, her voice low and menacing. "I'll get what I want, no matter what it takes." And with that, she pulled her arm free and turned to run. I tried to catch her, but she was too fast. She disappeared into the darkness, leaving me standing there, feeling helpless and scared. I went back inside, my heart racing with fear. I knew that I had to do something, but I didn't know what. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, with no way out. I paced back and forth in the study, trying to think of what to do next. As I paced, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. The $500,000 check was gone. I had left it on the desk, but now it was nowhere to be found. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. Emma must have taken it, I thought. She must have been looking for it all along. I knew that I had to act fast. I couldn't let her get away with the money. I quickly grabbed my phone and dialed the police, trying to report the theft. But as I waited for them to arrive, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was running out of time. Emma was desperate, and I knew that she would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. As I waited, I heard a noise coming from outside. It sounded like someone was trying to get in. I felt a surge of fear, wondering if it was Emma. I quickly got up and went to the door, trying to see who it was. But as I looked out the peephole, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a stranger, a man with a scar on his face. He was looking around nervously, as if he was trying to make sure no one was watching. And then, he looked up and saw me. Our eyes met, and I felt a jolt of fear. Who was this man, and what did he want? I tried to open the door, but it was stuck. The man was trying to get in, but I couldn't let him. I was trapped, with no way out. And as I looked into his eyes, I knew that I was in grave danger. I tried to push the door shut, but the man's hand was already inside, grasping for the handle. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I struggled to keep the door closed, but he was too strong. Slowly, he began to push the door open, his eyes fixed on me with a menacing glare. I knew I had to act fast, or else I would be in serious trouble. I quickly scanned the room, looking for something to defend myself with. That's when I saw it, a large vase on the coffee table, within arm's reach. I grabbed the vase and held it up, ready to strike. The man's eyes flickered towards the vase, and for a moment, he hesitated. But then, his expression hardened, and he continued to push the door open. I was trapped, with no way out. As the door creaked open, I raised the vase, ready to defend myself. But just as I was about to strike, the man suddenly froze. He looked past me, towards the back of the room, and his expression changed from anger to surprise. I followed his gaze, and that's when I saw Emma. She was standing in the shadows, her eyes fixed on the man with a mixture of fear and anger. "What are you doing here?" she spat, her voice venomous. The man took a step back, his eyes darting between Emma and me. I was just looking for something," he stammered. Emma took a step forward, her eyes blazing with fury. "You're not going to find it here," she snarled. "Leave now, before I call the police." The man hesitated, clearly unsure of what to do. But then, he seemed to make a decision. He turned and ran, disappearing into the night. Emma and I were left standing there, frozen in shock. As we looked at each other, I saw something in her eyes that made my heart skip a beat. It was a glimmer of recognition, a hint of understanding. And in that moment, I knew that Emma was hiding something from me. But what? I took a step forward, my heart racing with anticipation. "Emma, what's going on?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Emma's eyes flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flash of fear. But then, her expression hardened, and she turned away. "Nothing, Dad," she said, her voice cold. "Just forget it." I knew that I couldn't forget it. I knew that something was wrong, and I was determined to find out what it was. I took another step forward, my eyes fixed on Emma's back. "Emma, tell me what's going on," I said, my voice firm. But she just shook her head, her shoulders stiff with tension. I knew that I had to keep pushing, to keep asking questions until I got the truth. But as I looked at Emma's back, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was in over my head. Something was very wrong, and I didn't know what it was. But I was determined to find out. I took another step forward, my heart racing with anticipation. And then, just as I was about to ask another question, I heard a noise coming from outside. It sounded like footsteps, heavy and deliberate. Emma's head snapped up, and she turned to face me. Her eyes were wide with fear, and I knew that we were in trouble. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I shook my head, my heart racing with fear. "I don't know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But as we stood there, frozen in fear, I knew that we were running out of time. Whatever was coming for us, it was coming fast. As we stood there, frozen in fear, the footsteps grew louder and closer. It sounded like someone was coming up the walkway, their footsteps heavy and deliberate. Emma's eyes were fixed on the door, her face pale with fear. I knew that we had to do something, but I didn't know what. I looked around the room, trying to think of a plan. But before I could come up with anything, the footsteps stopped right outside the door. There was a moment of silence, and then the doorbell rang. It was a loud, jarring sound that made us both jump. Emma's eyes were wide with fear, and I knew that we had to be careful. I slowly got up and made my way to the door, trying to be quiet. I looked through the peephole, and what I saw made my heart skip a beat. It was a man in a suit, his face stern and serious. He was holding a briefcase in one hand, and a piece of paper in the other. I knew that I had to be careful, so I slowly opened the door and stood back, trying to block the entrance. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to sound calm. The man looked at me, his eyes cold and unyielding. "I'm looking for Emma," he said, his voice firm. "I have some papers for her to sign." I looked at Emma, who was still standing in the living room, her eyes fixed on the man with fear. "What papers?" I asked, trying to stall for time. The man held out the paper, and I saw that it was a contract of some kind. "This is a contract between Emma and our company," he said, his voice firm. "It's regarding a business deal that we've been negotiating." I knew that something was off, so I tried to stall for time. "I think you should leave," I said, trying to sound firm. But the man just smiled, a cold and calculating smile. "I'm afraid I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice dripping with menace. "Emma needs to sign these papers, and I'm not leaving until she does." I knew that we were in trouble, so I tried to think of a plan. But before I could come up with anything, Emma spoke up. "I'll sign them," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her, shocked. "Emma, no," I said, trying to stop her. But she just shook her head and walked towards the man. He held out the contract and a pen, and Emma signed the papers without even reading them. As she signed, the man's smile grew wider, and I knew that we were in trouble. "Thank you, Emma," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "This is exactly what I needed." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving us standing there in shock. As we watched him go, I knew that we had to do something. We had to find out what was going on, and we had to stop it before it was too late. But as I looked at Emma, I saw that she was already gone, lost in a world of her own. She was staring out the window, her eyes fixed on something in the distance. And I knew that I had to follow her, to see where she was going and what she was doing. I slowly got up and followed her, trying to be quiet. As we walked, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Something was wrong, and I didn't know what it was. But I was determined to find out, no matter what it took. As we walked, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Something was wrong, and I didn't know what it was. But I was determined to find out, no matter what it took. Emma was walking quickly, her feet carrying her towards some unknown destination. I followed her, my eyes fixed on her back as we navigated the dark streets. The city was quiet, the only sound being the distant hum of traffic and the occasional bark of a dog. But I knew that we were being watched. I could feel eyes on us, boring into our skin as we walked. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just paranoia. But I couldn't shake the sense that we were being followed. As we turned a corner, Emma suddenly stopped. She was standing in front of a large, imposing building, its walls towering above us like a monolith. I looked up at it, feeling a sense of awe. What was this place? And why had Emma brought me here? I looked at her, but she wasn't answering. She was staring up at the building, her eyes fixed on something above us. I followed her gaze, and that's when I saw it. A figure was standing on the roof, its outline silhouetted against the moon. I felt a jolt of fear, my heart racing with anticipation. Who was that? And what did they want? Emma seemed to sense my fear, and she turned to me. Her eyes were cold and calculating, and I knew that she was hiding something. "What is this place?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Emma didn't answer. She just turned and walked towards the building, her feet carrying her towards the entrance. I followed her, my heart racing with fear. As we entered the building, I was struck by its opulence. The walls were lined with marble, and the floor was made of polished wood. It was a luxurious space, and I couldn't help but feel out of place. Emma seemed to know where she was going, and she led me deeper into the building. We walked through a series of corridors, each one more luxurious than the last. And then, we came to a door. It was a large, imposing door, with a sign that read, "Private." Emma produced a key and unlocked the door, pushing it open with a flourish. As we entered the room, I was struck by its beauty. The walls were lined with books, and the floor was made of soft, plush carpet. It was a peaceful space, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of calm. But as I looked around, I realized that something was off. The room was too perfect, too polished. And then, I saw it. A figure was sitting in the corner, its eyes fixed on us. I felt a jolt of fear, my heart racing with anticipation. Who was this? And what did they want? Emma seemed to sense my fear, and she turned to me. Her eyes were cold and calculating, and I knew that she was hiding something. "Welcome," the figure said, its voice low and menacing. "I've been waiting for you." As the figure spoke, I felt a chill run down my spine. Its voice was low and menacing, and I could sense a malevolent presence in the room. Emma seemed to be in a trance-like state, her eyes fixed on the figure with a mixture of fear and fascination. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure began to rise from its seat, its movements slow and deliberate. As it stood up, I saw that it was a tall, imposing man with piercing eyes and a cruel smile. He was dressed in a black suit, and his presence seemed to fill the room with an aura of darkness and foreboding. "So, you're the one who's been asking questions," the man said, his voice dripping with malice. "I must say, I'm impressed. You're more curious than I thought." Emma seemed to snap out of her trance-like state, and she took a step back, her eyes wide with fear. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man chuckled, a cold, mirthless sound. "Oh, I think you know what I want," he said. "You see, Emma, you've been playing with fire. You've been asking questions, poking your nose into things that don't concern you. And now, you're going to have to pay the price." I felt a surge of anger and fear, and I took a step forward, trying to intervene. But the man held up a hand, and I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Don't bother trying to protect her," he said, his eyes glinting with amusement. "She's made her bed, and now she's going to have to lie in it." Emma seemed to shrink back, her eyes wide with terror. "What are you going to do to me?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man smiled, a cold, cruel smile. "Oh, I think you'll find out soon enough," he said. "But for now, let's just say that you're going to have to come with me." As he spoke, the man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. It was a taser, and he was pointing it directly at Emma. I felt a surge of fear and anger, and I knew that I had to act fast. I tried to lunge at the man, but he was too quick. He pressed the taser, and Emma let out a scream as she was incapacitated. The man turned to me, a cold, calculating look in his eyes. "And as for you," he said, "I think you'll find that you're in a bit of a bind. You see, you've been poking your nose into things that don't concern you. And now, you're going to have to pay the price." I felt a surge of fear, and I knew that I was in grave danger. The man raised the taser, and I knew that I was going to have to think fast if I wanted to survive. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a glimmer of recognition, a hint of familiarity. And in that moment, I knew that I was in deeper trouble than I had ever imagined. As the man raised the taser, I knew that I was running out of time. But I refused to give up. I remembered the words of my wife, who had always told me to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. I thought of Emma, who had been through so much already, and I knew that I had to protect her. With a surge of adrenaline, I launched myself at the man, determined to stop him. The two of us crashed to the ground, wrestling for control of the taser. I could feel the man's grip tightening around my wrist, but I refused to let go. With a Herculean effort, I managed to wrestle the taser away from him and pointed it directly at his chest. The man's eyes widened in shock as I pressed the trigger, and he let out a scream of pain as the electricity coursed through his body. As the man lay there, incapacitated, I turned to Emma and helped her to her feet. She was shaking with fear, but I could see the gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I smiled and hugged her tightly. "You're safe now," I said. "I've got you." As we stood there, holding each other, I heard the sound of sirens outside. The police had arrived, responding to a tip from an anonymous caller. I smiled, knowing that justice was finally being served. The man, who had caused so much pain and suffering, was being taken away, and Emma and I were finally safe. As we watched the police lead the man away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of satisfaction and closure. Karma had finally caught up with the man, and he was being held accountable for his crimes. Emma and I were finally free from the fear and the terror that had haunted us for so long. We hugged each other tightly, tears of joy streaming down our faces. "Thank you," Emma whispered again, her voice full of emotion. "Thank you for saving me." I smiled and hugged her tightly. "I'll always be here for you," I said. "I'll always protect you." As we stood there, holding each other, I knew that our journey was finally over. We had faced our fears, and we had come out on top. We had found justice, and we had found closure. And as we walked away from the scene, arm in arm, I knew that our future was bright, and that we would always be there for each other. The man, who had caused so much pain and suffering, was finally behind bars, where he belonged. And Emma and I were finally free, free to live our lives without fear, free to love each other without worrying about the past. We had found our happy ending, and we would never let it go. As we walked away from the scene, I looked up at the sky and smiled. My wife was finally at peace, and Emma and I were finally free. We had found our justice, and we had found our closure. And as we walked off into the sunset, arm in arm, I knew that our love would conquer all, no matter what challenges lay ahead.